Welcome.
Lead balloons.
It's the alchemy of
Unpopular opinions. So,
Whoops, I have somewhere to be. There's actually bourbon in this, so everyone knows.
those things are very complicated and
I don't know that I actually believe what I'm about to say.
spreading lies.
This critical culture that we live in.
Just to try to be an asshole.
All right, welcome everybody to another scintillating episode of Lead Balloons, the alchemy of unpopular opinions. Joel, how are you tonight?
Man, I'm doing great. Really looking forward to this conversation about culture.
This is going to be a fun one called tonight. It's called Out of Our Elements. And this one's going to deal with Joel's and my travels overseas, protracted stays overseas, and our cross-cultural experiences there. But let's kick it off with this. Joel, you spent, I think it's 6 months in the Philippines. Correct me if I'm wrong, but what is your favorite Filipino dish? Can you say anything about their cuisine?
I can. I did spend 6 months studying abroad there. I also spent an additional month at a much earlier time in my life on a missions trip, but we'll get to that later. My
okay.
experience of Filipino cuisine is not super positive for a couple reasons. One is I was primarily eating things that were more simple. So I wasn't getting exposed to maybe the more lavish versions of Filipino cuisine. I got a lot of rice. I got a lot of fruit. Now, the fruit in the Philippines, on point. On point. No, nobody does mangoes and bananas better than the Philippines. They just...
I mean, do they really do them, or they just
they
appear?
They harvest them. Right, correct. They harvest them.
Yes.
But my most... How about I just twist this and say my most interesting experience of Filipino cuisine is something called balut. Now, when I came to the Philippines for my 1 month missions trip early on, we had a cultural night where me and 20 other people coming from the university that you and I both graduated from sent missions trips out every summer. We went there and they did a cultural night where the Filipino hosts gave us a bunch of fruit and cuisine. And I mean, that's when I got to try their pineapples, what's called durian, which smells terrible but tastes decent. But of the 20 of us Westerners who went over there, I think it was mostly girls on our trip. And I was one of 5 guys. But they gave us balut. Only 3 of us chose to eat it, and I was one of them. Balut is a duck egg. And they sell it on the streets like in my neighborhood in Dallas, like Mexicans stroll down the street selling elotes. They sell it on the street. Balut, it is a fertilized duck egg, 21 days fertilized, and then they boil it. Meaning there is a baby duck in the egg.
Ooh.
You crack it open. This is the process. You crack it open, create a hole in the top. You put a little salt in it. You drink the embryonic fluids.
Okay.
You crack it open and you pull out what is clearly this like wrapped up fetal duck. And it is got like tiny little feathers on it that are not yet developed, and you just pop it in your mouth. Now, the taste was not terrible. It just tasted like eggs. What it did do to my body was the texture as this thing unfurled inside of my mouth. And I felt like biting into parts that were like cartilagey. It's like, oh, that's developing bones. Oh, that might have been a beak. Wow, that's really squishy.
It's kind of like eating like a miniaturized 3D pro-life poster in a sense.
Oh my God, it is a pro-life poster. Oh my God. Okay. Just like, who's listening right now? Okay, so balut to me was something that was a one-time experience.
Wow.
I'm really glad I did. Filipinos will tell you that it's like superfood, that it's almost too nutritious. You can't eat too much of it, or else you'll get overwhelmed with power. They have weird like stories around balut, but you will find that you can get balut anywhere, and it is considered a delicacy.
I appreciate that. A great tale right off the bat.
Mm-hmm. What about you, my brother? Do you like anything Filipino?
Hey, I wonder if one of the reasons why you weren't a huge fan of Filipino food is maybe you're not as big of a meat eater. I haven't tried much Filipino food, but what I have had has been like braised short ribs and stuff like that. And I loved it, but I can't say I've had enough Filipino food to be able to say anything authoritative about it at all. So, yeah.
Yeah, I do remember in some of the classes I took in the Philippines, and you called it bibimbap. Is that what it's called? I can't remember what it's called.
Okay, so yeah, bibimbap. So we're going to Korean food. Man, I loved Korean food. And so I spent a year teaching English there in 2002, and almost every day for lunch there was a restaurant right across the street from our school, and they would come up to the third floor where my desk was, and this guy would deliver this tin tray, and it had the little bowl of rice and mixed vegetables and a kind of an over easy egg, and then you throw a little bit of their gochujang, which is kind of a spicy red sauce, mix it up, and then you had like maybe 5 or 6 those little banchan, I think maybe that might be, the little small plates, which I love, which might have kimchi, and always kimchi, and then other pickled vegetables and stuff like that. It was just fantastic. But I would eat bibimbap pretty much every day.
Yeah.
And love that. Love doing the Korean barbecue and
stuff like that.
How
long were you in Korea again?
1 year. I had a 1-year contract as an English teacher there. So
yeah, that's right. I wanted to say real quick, you mentioned braised ribs from the Philippines, and I thought about being in my theology classes in seminary in the Philippines, and the Filipinos that were in my classes, they had a huge issue with, and I don't remember the Filipino name, but it was a kind of a rural dish. It was pork that was cooked in its own blood. But it was supposedly like a really delicious dish that was really common. There's not a lot of meat in the Philippines, honestly, because they don't have cows that live there. In fact, I was told that there used to be monkeys in the Philippines, but they ate them all. So it's just like...
I love it.
So anyways, the pigs that they cooked in blood, that there's a passage in the book of Acts about not cooking animals in their own blood. And that the Christians that I was around took very, very seriously. And so they, even though it was like this just traditional dish that was native to the Philippines, the Christians I was around treated it like it was this idolatry that people were engaging in.
Interesting. Right. Well, let's hear now, just to prove maybe just some street cred that we've actually been to these places. Give me a short phrase in Filipino that you remember. Give me the phrase and then translate it.
Okay. When I went on a missions trip, I asked, because you've been on mission trips. You get up and you speak in front of people that don't speak a ton of English, and you have a translator that you're speaking through, and you're giving some very benign message about God being good, and your life has purpose, or whatever it may be. So I asked some Filipino teenagers, like, hey, I need you to teach me a phrase to open up with that'll be fun and funny. And so they taught me, ako ang pinaka pogi, or ako ang pinaka guapo. Guapo is good looking in Spanish. If you notice in the Philippines, the Spain occupied there for 500 years. So Spanish and Tagalog are very similar. So ako ang pinaka pogi, or ako ang pinaka guapo, just means, hi, I'm the best looking guy here.
Nice. Good.
So that's how I started my little messages.
Very good. Excellent. Yeah.
What about you? Tell me something in Korean.
Well, a very simple phrase that I learned was 나는 미국인입니다, which means I am American. And in Korean, very, very interesting, because the verb, English typically subject, verb, object, right? In many of the senses, it follows that order.
You and I were both in advanced grammar and usage together, so
the SVO structure. Yeah. So, but in Korean, so nanan would be the pronoun I, and then migukin is American. So I, American, and then imnida, which is am. That's the to be verb. So you could say, are you American? 당신은 미국인입니까? So, but yeah, 나는 미국인입니다. I'm American. Very simple.
Did they not already know just by looking at you?
Yeah, but that was, well, they probably, they at least knew I was from the West. Yeah.
I am white man.
I am white man. Exactly. Well, okay. So today's episode focuses on Joel's time abroad studying theology in the Philippines, as well as my year-long stint in South Korea as an English teacher. And what we hope to do in this episode, we're kind of having fun with it. This is a little less formal than maybe some of our highly formal discussions, but we want to hopefully intrigue you with some of our travel experiences, maybe inspire you as well, if you haven't done a lot of traveling, to get out there and see what might happen when you cross-pollinate, when you open yourself up to another culture. And if you have traveled a lot, you might enjoy some of the stories that we share and be able to relate to some of the things that we went through. But we both believe that travel has been a big part of our lives, has shaped us. I think if you are open to travel and you've had travel experiences and you're an open-minded person, it invariably shapes you. And it makes you come back home and reevaluate the way you thought about yourself and the way you thought about your culture and other cultures, and makes you happy about things in your culture in ways that you hadn't been before, and maybe angry or frustrated with things that you hadn't been before. So anyway, with that being said, Joel, tell us a little bit about how you came to the Philippines. So both like you went on a mission trip first, and then you went to study abroad during your time in seminary. So what prompted these trips?
Yeah, so my first trip there, and I'll talk very briefly about that because I'm mostly going to talk about my 6 months studying abroad there. The first time I went there was as a mission trip. I think I was 20 years old, went through my college, and I just randomly chose it. And it was a fantastic experience. I was over there for a month. I spent a week in Manila volunteering with Habitat for Humanity, building buildings, concrete. I got like so sweaty, so sore doing that kind of stuff. We're on the equator there in the Philippines. So it was the real deal. Then we traveled. If you don't know, the Philippines is basically broken into thirds. The top is Luzon, the largest island that Manila's on. The middle are the Visayas, a bunch of tiny islands. And then the bottom is one, it's not as big as Luzon, but has small islands around it called Mindanao. And so we went down to Mindanao, and I stayed in what's called YWAM. Youth with a Mission was a Christian organization that we stayed with, and we went to a bunch of rural villages, worked with orphanages, that kind of work. And it was really powerful. I had a powerful experience working in the dump in like the city dump of Davao City in Mindanao, and the people who live there. And that was the first time that this 20-year-old had ever been exposed to so much humanity living in utter poverty, the kind of poverty that just breaks your heart just by a second of a glance at it. You know what I mean? When all you have to do is see a glance of it, and your heart just cracks open and go like, how the fuck are people still living like this? Why is this still happening? You just get sad and angry, and all the emotions flood through you, and you're just like, what can I do? I need to change everything. I need to save these people.
Yes,
right?
Yes.
Yep. And so anyways, that was my 1 month experience there. And then the 6 month experience was I was studying in the seminary in Springfield, Missouri. And there was a sister seminary in the Philippines that was associated with the denomination I grew up with, Assemblies of God. And this seminary was in Baguio City, which is on Luzon, the second largest city next to Manila. And so it's northern Luzon. We went up there. And this was, when I say we, that was my ex-wife, her and I both went to seminary together, and we studied over there. We transferred over there for two reasons. One, I was strongly advocating, I wanted to have an experience of living abroad for a significant period of time. And by significant, I meant more than 3 months. I wanted to get into a culture before I had children. And so that was one thing I was advocating for. And then secondly, we were poor seminary students, and the cost of credits at where we were going was like $500 a credit, and in the Philippines it was $20 a credit. So we went over there and studied for a trimester and a summer. So basically 2 semesters in 6 months piled in. I saved like $20,000. So that's the other reason why we went there.
Jeez, that's a good reason, man, on its own. Yeah. Excellent.
So tell me about the Korea. What prompted you to go and teach English there?
Well, I'm going to answer that. After I answer that, I forgot I wanted to follow up just a little bit on some follow-up questions for sure. But Korea. At the end of college, I was on a track to go get a master's degree in teaching English as a second language. I had actually been accepted at a place called Wheaton College to do a master's in TESOL. And,
pure evangelicalism right there.
It's just the hub, the academic epicenter of evangelicalism. So I was going to go to Wheaton College, and I was going to get my master's to teach English as a second language with the ultimate goal of being a tent-making missionary, which is I'm not going to unpack that, but basically is a kind of missionary who goes sort of covertly. You have a trade. I was going to teach English and then be in a country where maybe it wasn't allowed to.
Then you can win the people over for the Lord.
That's right. You weren't allowed to be preach the gospel openly, but you could sort of do it covertly. So that was the idea. So anyway, but I was like, well, I would like to actually experience doing it before I go ahead with this degree. And so I about almost a year after graduating, not quite a year after graduating college, I followed some of my friends who had already gone to Korea. They'd been there several months, and they had sort of laid the groundwork at a private English academy there. And so I told them I wanted to come and try it out as well. And that's basically what got me there.
That's awesome.
And like you, I wanted to. I had multiple mission trip experiences. I traveled internationally with my family. I was fascinated with other cultures. I had studied Spanish. So it wasn't a big jump for me, but I really wanted to sort of test my mettle somewhere and be. I mean, the longest I think I'd been gone was a month in Guyana after my sophomore year in college, and I wanted to see if I could handle being away for a year. And so it was quite an adventure.
And you handled it, bro. You wrestled that snake to the ground.
Man, I stayed alive. I handled it. It was wild. So we'll go into that a little bit more. But I want to ask you. Okay, so I know a little bit about sort of what brought you to the Philippines and a couple of big reasons that you shared. But how did so you studied theology? You'd studied theology in college. You'd already been in seminary for a little while. How did studying theology in an Asian context shape your theological and personal development?
This was just the alignment of the stars for me. I had just started really getting into postmodernism at the time and studying what was happening in Western culture in terms of questioning the assumptions of basically modern thought. And when I was in the Philippines and you get out of a culture, you begin to just realize, oh my gosh, you zoom out and you begin to see, oh, culture are these things that are like, they're not static. They're dynamic. They're moving. They're shifting. They're evolving. They don't change overnight, but they do move in a slow, steady pace towards things. And there are things that drive that. And that was what was real fascinating to me. I was always so fascinated by why. Why do we think this way? Why do we do things this way? And that being over in the Philippines, what I took a class called Asian Theological Issues, and that was a seminar class, which for those who aren't in the educational world, seminar class is primarily it's not lecture based, it's discussion based. You're creating opportunities for there to be debate, for there to be student presentations and conversation and discussion. So this was taught by a Chinese Malay professor who was my favorite professor, Yi Taomwa, and he he told us at least a third of Malaysia was Chinese. Just so many people in Malaysia are Chinese. So he grew up in Malaysia, but was ethnically Chinese. And he taught this class in English. Everyone had to speak English there. And my class consisted of Koreans, of Vietnamese, Tongans, New Zealanders, Mongolians. It was just like, there was not more than 3 people from any nation. It was an amazingly diverse class of about 40 people. And everyone was presenting on different things. And for me, I was just in heaven with the diversity and the stories and the different ways of looking at things that it was like disturbing on one hand to go like, oh, this is the way your culture handles adoption, but also like to hear the logic of it from their perspective and was always so fascinating to me. And like, oh, this is how you do New Year's. Oh, this is how you guys perceive pastors in your local community. Like, I remember a story from one of the Samoan guys who I really got to love. His name was Makasua, and he was such a good dude. And Samoans were these huge, but fun-loving dudes. And he was telling me about like in his village, the pastor, if someone came from another village who was accused of murder, the pastor could come over and say like, no, he's protected, and no one could touch him. It was, and he was talking about it in such a way where it was just like, see how revered pastors are. Pastors are revered. They have so much power. They have so much authority. But me, come from my Western perspective, I'm like, that's too much authority to give a human being. He's going to fucking abuse that. You know what I mean? Gosh, so it was so interesting, right. Just like just the differences and just watching and listening and absorbing.
Yeah. Wow. That's pretty cool, man. Yeah. So as far as in South Korea, I think that, I can relate to some of your stories from the Philippines, and it was, I had traveled to Guyana. I had been to South Africa as a child, a little bit in Europe. But being in Korea was the very first time in my life that I felt so far away from home, in both invigorating ways and in ways that made me quite lonely too at times.
Of course.
I was lucky because when my roommate was a college friend, one of my best friends from college, and then there were several other ORU students and students from our college, who were teachers at the school, and then we had this larger community of English teachers and other sort of people from the West that we got together with, and we had a English speaking church that we went to on Sunday, and we'd hang out at nights after school after we got done with work. So there was a little bit of a cushion there from sort of facing the culture head on, but still we were still thrown into the deep end. And I remember one of the experiences that really stands out to me is like the moment when I felt sort of the farthest, and I was geographically the farthest from home. But I remember early on, I'd been there like a month, and for some reason they had some of us come over to teach without getting our visa situation handled. And so apparently we had to leave the country to go to Japan on an overnight ferry to get there the next morning to go to the Korean embassy, Korean consulate, I guess, and get our paperwork done. And we had to spend sort of the day there in Japan, in the city of Fukuoka. So anyway, we're on this
overnight Japan shirt on.
Yeah, man. There you go. Love it. And so we took this overnight ferry, and I remember it was in the wintertime, and there were, I don't know, maybe 100, 200 people on this ferry. But I went outside out on the deck. Nobody was really out there. And I remember just sitting there kind of looking out at the stars. It was, you'd see a few lights of other ships in the distance. But I remember just sitting, looking out and thinking, I'm so far away from home right now. And of course, I'd be able in the next day or two to get on the phone and call home. But that experience of being so far away and being totally out of your element. And I think that it was a humbling experience. I think that it was a perplexing experience as I think one of the things I'll say about being in Korea that was very difficult, especially working as an English teacher. So my main role there, my primary role with most of my classes was to give students exposure to spoken English. And so we had curriculum that was already, we had books and stuff that were given to us that we would just read from. It was pretty basic in a lot of our classes, but we would just take the students through exercises. But one of the things that became quite apparent in that culture was, even though there was a huge emphasis on education and achievement was pushed big time, the form of instruction in the public schools that the kids would go to during the day was rote learning, was memorization and regurgitation. Of course, they learned a lot of stuff and they were quite smart. But something that I took for granted come from American culture was sort of imagination and creativity and just taking initiative and this kind of thing. But the problem was nobody in that culture, you didn't really want to stand out. Right. Maybe you might talk a little bit about Hofstede's theory here in a second, but sort of like in America, it's individualism. And in Korea, it's the collective. And so you don't really want to stand out. That's not really something that's prized. And so I remember I had one class where I was actually teaching composition. This was with a group of students. This is interesting because it was with a group of students who were they were called the genius class. I don't know why. God. They weren't geniuses, but these were students who had lived in the US for a while. So many of them in this class, I would just speak basic conversational standard English with these folks, with these kids. And this was a middle school class, and we would just have normal conversations. But then one day, so I was teaching them composition. I was teaching them how to write paragraphs and an intro statement and your 3 paragraphs and your conclusion, all this kind of stuff. But I just gave them a piece of paper one day and I said, okay, we're going to do a free writing exercise right now, kind of like journaling or whatever. I'm going to give you a piece of paper and I want you to just fill out the paper as best you can with just kind of writing about whatever comes to you. And literally sat there for about 10, 20 minutes. And most kids had absolutely nothing written on their paper because they needed a very specific rubric, a very specific prompting for that. And I remember just being so frustrated with, like, why can't you guys just be creative and start? But it wasn't part of their thing, and then nobody wanted to stand out. So it wasn't a thing there. But yeah, anyway, so there you go about that. But Joel, when you were in the Philippines, I mean, we've touched on this a little bit tangentially, but how did life there shake you up? In particular, how did it sort of like decenter you, or put you into somebody else's story? We can be, when we live here, we can kind of be egocentric. Then you go to another country and you're in their world, and the things that you take for granted, you do not sort of rule the roost there in any way. Maybe we don't here either. But what shook you up about life over there?
Well, what shook me up primarily was I'm a shakeable person, meaning I've never struggled. In my opinion, is that fair to say? I've never struggled with what I would call just an inherent narcissistic view of my views, that I'm right, no one else can be right. I think it's part of having deep insecurities from a kid. I also was open to the way other people saw things, and that turned into a strength in terms of being open. Now, when I get there, I get to hear these other perspectives that other people are offering, and I found them to be energizing. I found it to be quite powerful. There was a class I just mentioned, Asian theological issues. And one of the books that they had us read was Mangoes or Bananas. It was a Filipino theologian. Now, in the Philippines, Christianity came via missionaries. I mean, unless you're in Israel and Rome, like Christianity is came over via mostly missionary and imperial efforts. And so in the Philippines, this theologian was basically advocating for Asians to do theology as Asians versus being Asians doing theology as, thinking about theology according to the Western views that they were given by missionaries. So this Filipino theologian wrote this book on Asian views of theology, and he called it Mangoes or Bananas. And my professor, who's this Chinese Malay, holds up a banana and a mango. So look at both of them. What color are they on the outside? We're like, yellow. Great. Now, that's a bit of a racist statement. This is this goes back way.
His words, not yours.
Yeah, his words, not mine. Right? Both yellow on the outside. You open up a banana, it's white on the inside. It looks Asian on the outside, but underneath, it's white theology that they are believing and holding to. You open up a mango, it's also yellow on the inside. So the argument was for him, this Filipino, I think he was Methodist, if I remember correctly, wrote this book, was we Asians need to do theology according to our roots, not the people who live on the other side of the planet's roots. Which means that there's very different experiences that they had. Pluralism was much more common in the East than it was in the West, where religion and politics were so intertwined with Rome and Europe. But you got in the East, you got so many different views, and you have like Christianity is dealing with religions like Hinduism and Buddhism and Muslim in ways that Christians didn't have to really deal with in America and in Europe as much. And so their thinking was very influenced by these other religions. There was a much deeper appreciation for a theology of suffering in the East than I was ever experienced in growing up in church in the West. In America, we talked about we couldn't skate past fast enough to get past Good Friday when Jesus died, because we were just trying to get to the resurrection when he was alive and victorious. Whereas in the East, and that's really, it's not being fair to my Catholic friends who are like saying, we do suffering right.
Yes,
but
yes.
The Eastern Christians were much more prone to just like, yeah, of course, our spirituality is going to be deeply entrenched in an understanding of suffering. And so that's it shook me, because I began to see that the center was not the center. I was me and my ex-wife were two of, I think, 4 Western American students on campus. And we had professors take us both aside at the end saying, thank you for being very open to our cultures. Thank you for being very curious. Thank you for seeing the way we think about things and do things differently as valuable. Because as it turned out, the other Westerners and the other Americans on campus were what they experienced as typical, which is, the term is ethnocentric. Like, my culture is the center of the world. And that's what a lot of Americans kind of think, is like, this is God's country, right? And we came over to the Philippines going like, no, there's no such thing as God's country. There's only countries that are all squabbling in their egoic ways to try and find a spiritual path towards God. And so what I found there, what shook me, was actually very life-giving, because I needed to be shooken out of the trance of American culture, which is, we are the best, and it's such a bullshit lie. That doesn't mean I'm not proud to be an American. There's a lot of things I love and appreciate about America. However, I don't drink Kool-Aid.
Well, listen, you and I both went on mission trips. So I went to Guyana once, and then I went to Mexico. Gosh, I've been to Mexico 4 times on mission trips.
Wow.
But I think that
I've only been once. Wait,
yeah,
twice.
Something that I think we probably began to take for granted with our experiences. I think we're alike in this way. Is we were required to spend time learning about the culture before we ever went on the trip. And then obviously when we got there, you're staying in like host homes, you're staying at like a YWAM base. But I mean, you're thrown in the deep end. You have to learn about these places. And I think I started to take that for granted in my young life. And I think as I've gone along, that's just been a part of who I am as a person. And I owe a lot of that to just the experiences that I had, not to necessarily a ton of conscious choices. We went on these mission trips, and we were going there to like convert the people. But I mean, really what ended up happening is it ended up being like this kind of vacation in a sense, although it was hard and different teams did different productive things, and some teams were less productive. But we went we got cultural exposure in a big way. And so I've really taken that for granted, just that process of learning about other cultures. But I do think as Americans, if we're not proactive about cross-cultural pollination, it won't happen. And one of the reasons, I mean, at least speaking internationally here, is we're not sort of like, if you're in Europe, you're in Germany, I mean, you're surrounded by, you're within 500 miles of like 8 or 9 other countries. You know, if you live in the heart of if you're living in Tulsa, Oklahoma, where we went to school, you're 700-800 miles from Mexico, quite a ways from Canada, but you are oceans apart from a lot of other places in the world. And so you have to reach for those experiences. They don't come to you. And as a result, I think it's not something that comes naturally for most Americans. Is that, and I think I think one way that it does hurt us is sometimes we don't tap into the great buffet of wisdom that comes from all these other cultures in terms of how they deal with problems of daily life, with political issues, with the spiritual issues, with psychological issues. We don't tap into those. And then you and I have those experiences where we go over like, hey, this would be like a really good way of doing something, right? We got to consider it. And everyone's like, oh, I'd never thought about that. Well, of course, because you'd have to go or go virtually to these places. But we can become so insulated. I think that's one challenge for us as Americans is either travel overseas if you can, or if you can't do that, man, read a translated book, from the Philippines or by a Korean author, or watch a foreign film, or start getting excited about other places. Or there are a lot of things that you can do. And I think your life becomes richer. And I think you become, as a culture, we become sort of better equipped to tackle some of the challenges that we face when we're not just relying upon sort of the family wisdom.
Yep. I agree with that. When you talk about that, it makes me think about just when we were there, when you were in the Korea and I was in the Philippines, especially when I was in college on the mission trip, but even when I was in seminary, like technology was not where it's at now. I remember I had to buy a separate webcam because laptops didn't come equipped with cameras back then. And I had a $1,000 Dell laptop, which was so like things were just expensive back then. And I had to buy a little camera to go on top, and I had to pay money put into some global money thing so that I could get credits on Skype so that I could talk to my family who were 14 hours removed. You know what I mean? That was my life back. That's how I stayed connected to home. It was like just a little bit better than writing letters.
Man, I remember being in an internet. I remember going because not until I've been there for like 7 or 8 months, and I finally got my own laptop computer. A lot of times I would borrow from my roommate, but he was gone. He'd taken his computer with him, and I had to go to the internet cafe. Back when those were a big thing, like in Korea, those were a huge thing. And so I'd go to the internet cafe and I'd pay like $5 for an hour of usage or whatever, to get online and send emails and buy my computer, but it was so different back then. But yeah, man, that was another thing too, right? I mean, when you made calls, like you had to pay money. You had to pay money for long distance calls, and so it was like I remember I would talk to family like I'd try like once a month. Usually, I mean, there'd be emails, but conversation, a half-hour conversation once a month because it started getting really expensive. Yeah. So
I love that you are encouraging people to travel, encouraging people to experience different cultures. When I was a youth pastor, I did not like having to organize all these mission trips. Primarily, part of the reason was I knew that we weren't really doing a lot of good. We would take these group of teenagers over somewhere else, and we create events for them to do stuff. But mostly the people who were there entrenched in these areas doing work, we were a distraction at best to them. We went over there and they were like, oh my God, I gotta host these 20 entitled teenagers who are afraid of germs, whatever it may be. But
yes.
Every time I did that, the teenagers would come back. Their worldview would get shattered by something, and they'd come back having to reconstruct it. And I think about that like in terms of muscles and working out. Like when we work out, we tear muscles; they get shattered, and then they have to rebuild together. There's something about the experience of having your center completely removed, like it gets shattered is the word I'm going to keep using. And when you have to rebuild that, you get stronger, you get more grit, you get wiser, your view of life and the world just gets richer. And so what I hear you advocating for people to do is to get out of their element on purpose.
Absolutely. Big time. Yeah. And again, you could go travel, you could do an overseas trip, maybe go to another part of the US where the culture is very different. I went to New Orleans 6 years ago, and I felt like I was in a different world there. And so there's a lot of ways to do it, but I think it is good. I think I like the muscle building analogy. I think that's really on point. So, well, let's move towards wrapping this one up. But I want to ask you, Joel, so do you still feel inspired to travel? And if so, what's next on the agenda for you?
I mean, absolutely. I'm fascinated by this plane of existence that you and I have been put into. And we're on this planet called Earth that we call Earth. And now we happen to be living in the first time in our existence where globalization is a thing. That happened during our 20s because of the internet. Now we get to hear stories and are connected to people on the other side of the planet in ways that nobody in our ancestors have been able to do. Like people who were 2 days journey away might as well have been on the other side of the planet. And we get to experience so much richness here. And I mean, I enjoy watching the documentary or a series on Netflix that highlights a different culture. I enjoy that kind of stuff. And I love how art shows up in movies and films, but nothing can replace going somewhere, walking the streets of somewhere, feeling the good, the bad, and the ugly about a culture. And to be in a city and to see how it deals with not only its touristy stuff. That's what a lot of people do, is they just go for the touristy stuff, but they're not experiencing the culture. It's like watching Instagram and acting like you know a person because you flip through a couple of their selected pictures. Tourism doesn't give you a taste of a culture. tourism gives you a taste of consumerism.
Yeah.
And so getting to a place and trying to get outside of that bubble of tourism and actually experiencing, I think that's where you and me in our mission trips, we did not experience tourism. We experienced nitty gritty real life. This is what people who are borderline in poverty, this is how they're living, and they're good people, and they're content people, and this is what they eat, this is how they poop, this is how they wipe. Like, I remember hearing the people coming back from Saudi Arabia on the mission trips, and I was like, you don't have toilet paper over there? Like, yeah, we got used to just wiping with our hands. I'm like going, what? And I remember going to the Philippines and going like, what do you mean there's no toilets? The hole in the ground, that's where I take a dump? Wait, what? And they're like, we just squat. Funny story. When I lived in Baguio City in seminary, there was a mall that was in this big city. So this big, huge mall that was actually owned by a Chinese conglomerate. And you go into all these huge mall bathrooms, and all of the seats were taken off of the toilets. These are Western toilets. All the seats were taken off. And I was like, what's that about? I can't sit on that. Yeah, that's what happened. People were coming from the rural areas, and they didn't know, they looked down, they didn't know to sit on it. So they would get up and stand on it and wiggle and break them all.
Oh my God.
So they just took all the seats off because no one knew how to use them.
Yeah. Dude, when I was, one thing too about his travels, it destroyed my ego and my sense of how tough I was. Because I was in Guyana for a month, and I think maybe one hour of a day when I went into like the nicest bank in the capital city, did I have air conditioning. The rest of the time was no air conditioning. I mean, I feel like I sweated for a month. And I was a pansy. I mean, I struggled. I got sick. I was terrible. I was cranky. I'm just like, man, I am not as strong as I thought I was. I am not nearly as tough as I thought I was. But yeah. So, yeah.
Let me say this, Trent. I am fully committed to continuing to travel, as I know you are as well. And my next trip, I have some privileges right now with traveling.
Yeah.
And I am planning on a trip with my wife and my two girls, and we're going to go to London and Ireland. I've been to London before. I led a missions trip over to London, which was kind of weird. It's just like, why do you go to London? But it's a very secular place. But my real joy that I'm so excited about is going to Ireland. I've heard it's so beautiful there, and I just want to be able to see the culture there. And I'm excited about that. Do you have any big trips coming up in the next year?
I mean, I have some bucket list stuff. Like, I want to go back to Scandinavia. There's a chance I might do that this year. I want to go to New Zealand is big on the list. That's going to take some savings. And then Mongolia is a place that I'm fascinated by. I love listening to their language. But one place that I've been to, I went for the very first time. I went to Oregon last August.
What part?
And I started in Vancouver, Washington, actually, which is across the river from Portland. Spent a little bit of time in Portland, and then a few days in Eugene, and one day out in Florence, out at the Oregon coast there, and went up and down the coast a little bit. But so it has two main things which I love, in addition to a lot of other things I love, but two main things. It has the ocean, as well as lots of water, and it's heavily forested. Yeah. And it is so green. The pine trees are enormous there. And I thought the ocean was beautiful. I just loved it. And there's that part of me. You get this sometimes with travel. You go to a place and you're like, you connect with that place. It almost feels like you belong there. It feels sort of like a home in an indescribable way. And I've got to get back. I absolutely have to get back.
You know where you need to go? Astoria.
Want to go to Astoria. It's not a Tuma.
It's not a Tuma. It's
Bruni's Kindergarten Cop.
Saved by my pinches of power. Yeah. So one of my good friends lives in Astoria, and I've been there twice.
Beautiful place.
I spent several days in Portland, which was great. The the rose garden there. There's a Zen garden there that's gorgeous. But Astoria is on the coast right there.
Yeah.
Just south of the border of Washington. And the water over there, you'll see whales over there. And I got to go to Cannon Beach, where the final scene of Goonies, where you see the rocks out in the ocean and the One-Eyed Willie's ship sailing off into the blue. But I do also love Oregon because you're right. There's the water and the forests. They remind me of Northern California, where there's a lot of ferns. It's so lush.
Yes.
You feel like you're in Jurassic Park.
That's right. Absolutely.
It's very lush. Yeah.
But it's not super humid. I mean, it gets warm in the summertime. It's not super humid. So it's actually quite paradisical.
Just have a decent rain jacket.
Bring a rain jacket. Yes. Yeah. Excellent. Well, we hope that this episode has sort of connected with you. If you've traveled a lot, you can relate to some of the experience. If you haven't, maybe it's prompted you and inspired you to go out and travel and see the world and read books about other places and get outside yourself a little bit. So any closing thoughts, Joel?
Only this, that like we've kind of talked about, the traveling and experiencing different cultures is a bit of a hack. It does things to us in terms of encountering people. You build relationships with people and you realize that I remember hearing the story when I was going to seminary in the Philippines. They told the story of a Chinese woman who went to school there, and they had a policy on campus that if you're single, you had to have a roommate. And so she was paired with another roommate from someone from Japan. And as you might know, in Asia, a lot of people are not fans of Japan because they, throughout the centuries, invaded everywhere and killed a lot of people. And so this Chinese girl was placed and roomed with another Japanese woman. And she went there to school, she got her degree, and at the end of her time there, she got her degree. They asked her what was the biggest thing she learned, and she said that I can love a Japanese person too, because she was taught such prejudice and such anger and hatred towards the Japanese.
Yeah.
And so sometimes we need that external experience with a culture, but I'm going to argue that you don't have to go anywhere to be changed. You can access transformation simply by going internally and going like, what am I holding on to that is actually not true? And it usually is cultural stories, mythologies. We talk all about these kinds of things and challenge all these. This is why they're unpopular opinions, because we're challenging the things that the ruts that people most normally fall into. And what traveling can do, and what, if you're just open to reading books, watching movies, and letting go of what you believe is the center of the world as truth, then you will find yourself going deeper into truth. That's the paradox of it. We think it feels like we're letting go of truth, but actually, when we do that, we go deeper into it.
Mic drop. Okay, well, we're gonna close with that. Want to remind you that there's several ways that you can connect with us. You can watch our videos. We have a YouTube channel, Lead Balloons Podcast, where we have tons of videos and shorts as well, video shorts. We also have our website, leadballoonspod.com, where you can listen to episodes as well. You can check out blog posts from Joel and me, and learn more about us as well. You can also listen to our podcast on Apple, Spotify, and iHeartRadio, and reach out to us. We'd love to hear from you. leadballoonspodcast@gmail.com. If you go to our YouTube channel, please like, please subscribe, and please comment on our videos. It's gonna help us out with the algorithms and stuff. So anyway, we wish you the best, and we'll see you on the next episode.
Peace, y'all.